The opinions expressed on this program represent the viewpoints of individual authors or contributors and do not necessarily reflect those of Troy University.
Welcome to International Insights. I am Doug Davis, and with me is Michael Slobodchikoff. On this episode, we will be speaking with David Eades. For the last 25 years, David has worked as a frontline presenter and broadcaster for the BBC. He served as Europe correspondent, Ireland correspondent, and senior sports news correspondent, covering stories as wide-ranging as the death of Princess Diana, to the peace process in Northern Ireland, to FIFA World Cups, the Olympic Games, and Brexit. He has a long-standing pedigree in live television, fronting election coverage, flagship news, and business shows, and many other debates and programs, interviewing heads of government, leaders of industry, and celebrities in many fields. He serves on many advisory boards and is a keen golfer and cyclist. Mr. Eades, welcome to the show from England.
Doug, thank you very much. Thanks for a very kind introduction.
Pleasure.
It is truly a pleasure to have you on the show. And I would like to flip the tables for a second. Normally, you're the one in the anchor chair asking the questions. So it is my turn to flip the seat. I wanted to ask, given your impressive history with the BBC and all of the news stories that you've covered, which one are you most proud of, and how has it influenced you in your career?
Well, Michael, I'm going to start by saying one of the earliest lessons I learned is, we have to deal in facts and we have to get things right. So Doug's very kind invitation ended up by saying, from England. I'm actually in France at the moment, so I'll just get that straight. So that no one can doubt that what we're saying is at least as objective as we can be. Look, thank you for that. And it made me think, actually, because narrowing down to one story is challenging, let's say. So I'm going to cheat a little bit and I'm going to take two, if that's all right with you. And for good reason, because overall, essentially, while I started in newspapers, I am a broadcast journalist. That is where my sort of heart lies, and that's certainly where most of my career has been. And I think broadcast journalism demands two overriding qualities, I suppose. One is the ability to broadcast, of course, and the other one is the ability to be a strong journalist. And so what I've done, if that's all right with you, is I'm going to take two examples as to things that really stand out for me over my time. And the first one of those was, I suppose, the first massive global story that I found myself covering. And that was the death of Princess Diana, former Princess of Wales. As I was Europe correspondent at the time, and I remember it was a Sunday ahead of an August bank holiday. We'd had a barbecue at home, and half the chat was about this woman, Diana, who still held more than a nation, but certainly a continent, indeed large parts of the world, almost in her hand in terms of fascination. And around about midnight 30, I guess, I got a call. I was in a deep slumber. I'd had a few beers, I'll be honest. I was in a deep slumber, and I got a call from London. And the news organizer said, "David, sit up and listen. Diana is dead. Dodi is dying. Go to Paris." Now, that's quite a lot to take in the middle of the night in any case. But it meant that I was the first of the BBC's foreign gang, if you like, to get to Paris. We had one correspondent there at the time, and I joined him on that extraordinary roller coaster of a news story. And I think what sticks in my mind more than anything was around about 4:30 in the morning. The Interior Minister in France, Monsieur Chevènement, had announced ahead of anything that the British government had been able to say that Diana had died. And all protocol went out of the window. When it comes to royal families and the BBC, protocol is king. But on this occasion, it was too late. Forget the protocol. And my editor said, just get on set and tell us. So I had to come on and essentially deliver the news to those who were aware of it at that time of the day, that she was indeed dead. And the moments leading up to me actually pronouncing those words were frankly terrifying. And they were terrifying because I realized it was emotional, and I realized if I was wrong, I was finished. And those are very sort of broadcast, selfish, egocentric issues to deal with. But I got through that, and I can be completely honest with you, it was a fabulous experience as a journalist. The next 2 weeks were immense, and I felt I belonged on a broadcast stage. So that was the broadcast side, and I'll very briefly, because I'm probably wittering on already, but the journalism side came just a few years later when we had, as you mentioned at the beginning there, Doug, I was working on the Good Friday Agreement and the implementation of the peace process in Northern Ireland. Obviously highly sensitive and political, but the deal was done. And it emerged over time that there were a considerable number of dissident Republican attacks of sorts on former police and army veterans, which were unreported, and which the government at the time did not want reporting, because this was too delicate a time to start talking about problems within the process. And I worked on that story for quite a long time. I had to deal with quite a lot of what for me at the time felt intimidating challenges from within the government and the Northern Ireland office. And I rode them, and we did the story and we put it out there. And I felt like a journalist. I felt this was my trade, and it was a proving point for me. So I think if I put those two together, they perhaps were a couple of the sort of defining moments in my career.
Excellent. I have a follow-up question, and I want to find out, what is your opinion of the importance of the international media today? And do you think it's more difficult today to be objective than it has been in other eras? What are the challenges to being fair and objective in the contemporary newsroom?
I mean, that is a big question. In terms of international media today, you know, the thing about international media for me, and most of my work has been within it, is that it provides a second and different perspective to a domestic service. And that is where I like to think that people find an interest in it and a sense of, if not trust, but a certain respect that they are going to get things from a slightly different viewpoint. And in a way, that is its strength, and that remains its strength, because while it's certainly true that, you know, every international broadcaster has diplomatic niceties and politics to work around, and some are far more pronounced than others, on very many stories, we should be providing a service which is built around objectivity. There could be no great purpose a lot of the time in doing anything else. So as a foreign correspondent, I always felt that was my mission, was to strip away some of the, if you like, the domestic tight issues and detail, which can drown out the big picture on a story and offer the focus of what we think is going on here. Now, for international media, that still needs to be the case. It's more challenging than ever, and I'm sure we'll discuss this over the course of the minutes ahead, because there is so much information out there. And sifting through that information and deciding what is valid, what is invalid, is an ever-increasing challenge. This really is Sisyphus pushing that stone up that hill. It only gets tougher. Having said that, that is the joy of international media, that we offer a perspective you do not get down on street level. And in many respects, I think that is the purpose of what we're there for and what we have to do. Is it harder now than it has been before? I would say yes, on the basis of the amount of information out there. And by information is disinformation as much as it is valid, but also the ability to verify everything that comes in is only ever more challenging. If I take a slight shortcut, Doug, on the answer to the question, when I look at the BBC, I know that we have to lean on reputation in order to get through some of this stuff. I'm old school in one respect. I do believe that journalists and broadcast journalists and channels and outlets do need to tell people what is important sometimes. And we'll get into social media and the impact that has, I'm sure, in due course. But if you can do that from a position of strength of objectivity, people, I believe, still will listen. So building a platform of reputation is half the challenge of delivering effective international media. And as I say, being international, it's a slightly different perspective. It should be a stand back perspective some of the time, and a lot of the time it should be as objective as you're going to get. Now, that doesn't make it easy, but it makes it doable. And I think that's why international media very much has a very strong role to play.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I want to piggyback off of what Doug was asking, because I believe that a free press is vital for a functioning democracy. And you need to have a free press, a battle of ideas, and presenting that objectivity. What role would you say that the news media plays in that battleground of ideas and presenting information in an objective fashion?
It's interesting, isn't it, Michael? The word objectivity in itself is such a massive challenge here, and well, it's the well-worn Churchillian saying that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the rest. I mean, it is a very imperfect system. It really is, and objectivity is not necessarily the answer to the system working. But one of the great things about democracy is it does mean that you will have views from the left and views from the right and views from the center. You will have those views as long as there is an open democratic approach to provision of information. And as long as we, the people, get to decide who is the government, then those views get traction. And different views is what will enable people to make decisions as to what is right or wrong. Now, today, our media landscape is as awash with opinion as it is with information, possibly even more tilted towards opinion now than information. We can all get information from all different sources. So opinion drives a lot of this. Now, that is not objective. It is anything but. It is hugely subjective and often very challenging in terms of sort of working out where does the truth lie, what do I think? You're being targeted all the time in terms of what you should be thinking. But at least we have those opportunities within a functioning democratic system. So I don't know that objectivity is necessarily the route ahead in terms of thinking about a democratic system. But those subjective views still don't provide power to one side or another, only influence. And as long as that is the case, and there is still a government, influence is good. Someone's got to influence you. You might not like the style in which it's done, but someone's going to influence you. So again, if we take that back a little bit to the international media, as you were saying earlier, we have that role to play, and we can provide as much objectivity as possible. But I think within democracies, it's simply a fact of life that opinion and subjectivity drives a lot of people's thoughts and considerations. And then what really matters is that you have a left and you have a right. You have varying viewpoints. I guess perhaps one of the challenges that we've seen over the last couple of decades, or maybe longer than that really, is that, who is wielding the power in terms of left and right, and how much of that media landscape do they have control of? So that will obviously tilt the degree of influence that's available. But then I go back to Churchill, this is the worst form of government except for all the others. It does work to a degree, and in that respect, I think we can be grateful.
Excellent. I have a follow-up question. And if we look at the Russian criticism of the American and British media in particular, they say that it's actually propaganda. And how has this affected the reputation of our own media, and how do you respond to these claims?
Well, I mean, it's a bit rich, isn't it? Let's be honest. It's a bit rich hearing it from a country where the media is under such tight control, not just scrutiny, but control, where a lot of the media is censored or blocked. I mean, BBC, Deutsche Welle, these are not open, free channels broadcasting day and night. They are restricted. Some of them are lucky to be restricted. So, there's a bit of pot calling the kettle black here. We've got to be realistic about what the state of Russian media is at the moment, and it is pretty horrible as a picture. So to turn the tables on Western media and say, your government mouthpieces I think is a bit rich. Press freedom is it's critically important, and it is provided by most Western democracies on a scale. But if you look at the Press Freedom Index, and I might point out Russia is pretty near the bottom, 18 of the first 20 countries there are, in fact, Western European democracies. They are standard, good old-fashioned democratic countries. So the message just has to keep coming that have a look at the media. Does it criticize government? Yes. Is it a mouthpiece for anybody? Well, yes, but not government. Are there changes in government in every 5 years? Very often, yes. And these are the roles that you have to look at in terms of trying to show that the modern world of our media, with its many flaws, is broadly speaking working. You can turn that around the other way. Russia doesn't sound a prayer. So obviously the question is not, is Russian media acceptable? It really is, how do you respond to the Russian criticism of Western media? I understand that. But you have to just keep showing consistency of message, of belief in the level of objectivity that you're broadcasting, which is one of the things that, and obviously I talk about the BBC because that's been such an important part of my journalistic career. But that message of consistency is critically important, and we don't bounce along happily with a government. We assess and where possible we impartially objectivize what is out there. What can you say about a government that simply says that Western media is a governmental mouthpiece when you just look at the diversity? It is a nonsense statement. I know that we have a lot of nonsense statements in the world, and if they're put forward forcefully enough, they stick. I think it's true to say, Michael, Doug, that the Russian people have a huge dependency now on TV, and it is overwhelmingly government channel television. So if you keep saying to that one direction, the Western media is a mouthpiece for its government, people are going to believe it. But that doesn't mean that we have to do anything about it. We've just got to keep putting out our consistent messages. Not sure if that's a satisfactory answer, but if anyone's got a better one, they haven't put it to practice yet.
Perfect. I I kind of want to go back to a subject that we talked about a little bit earlier, which is just the overwhelming amount of information that's out there, the overwhelming number of opinions that are out there, disinformation, and all of that. How is the media able to cope, prioritize, decide what is reportable, what's not reportable, and decide what to go with in terms of reporting media? I know it's a very difficult task, as you said, but how does one go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a task that's only getting tougher, isn't it? And I think, in terms of what goes out on social media platforms, there are so many other routes to getting information that run counter to the mainstream, that it makes it harder all the time. Well, one thing that established channels and other sort of news organizations have done for many, many years has been that what we at the BBC would call the reality check. Let's check those facts. But we haven't told people we're doing that. We just do it. There always have to be at least two sources to any story on any international story, unless it's coming directly from our own correspondent. At least two trusted sources, whether they are agencies or indeed individual mouthpieces, spokespeople, whatever. At least two to support any story. Now, I learned that when I started at BBC World Service Radio many, many moons ago, but we didn't tell the public we were doing that. We didn't tell our audiences that this isn't just us saying so. We have checked and checked. Now we say we are running through all this and we are checking it as we go. So we're trying to make the point all the time that this has been treated seriously, it's been checked, it's been counter-checked, and where we can't attribute a fact, we say so. And that also is something, we all do it now, this has not been independently verified, or, this is attributed directly to ABC. So that is at least a part of the effort that goes on to say, take us seriously. We are showing you how we are trying to get to the root of this truth. And this is as far as we've got, if you like, if I can put it that way. There is no question that, especially if you look at figures for TV, less so for radio at the moment, but they're falling. Fewer people are tuning into TV. They're doing things another way. And a lot of that is the Google platform and picking out these echo chambers that might work for them. The provision of news by just other groups. We've seen it through COVID was a very good example, but you've seen it through 1,000 different routes. There are people who will put out an alternative view. And I'm not dismissing that alternative view particularly, but I am saying it makes it that much harder for the established organizations to get through to people, to believe that we are putting in the hours. We are working so hard to get these stories right. Quality of source, we need to know that, and we need to build on it all the time. The relevance of the material that's on offer out there. I mean, I don't know if this is part of the question, but how do we decide what goes into a news bulletin? What stories do matter and what stories don't matter it's a constant challenge. And we get more information and more stories than ever before, as we all know. I mean, how on earth do we cover all the climate related stories of any given day in a bulletin? You can't. So you've got to start making priorities as you go. And again, a lot of that comes down to expertise of your journalists, experience of your editors, and a need to provide balance. At the end of it, we're in the news business. So if it's not new, it's got slightly less chance of getting there. If it's new, it's got more chance of getting there. And that's not to dismiss the importance of other stories, but you guys know, we all know, there is probably no more damaging story in the West at the moment than the Russia-Ukraine continuing conflict, invasion. We can use our own terms. But you can't expect an audience to feast on that day in, day out. You to move around and find different ways of telling stories. So those are the sorts of ways you deal with partly the massive information, but also getting to the heart of stories that matter. Having a diet, having a variety in your diet, and trusting. Again, it comes back to trust again and again. Trusting in the people providing it, which is built on, ideally, on reputation and to a certain extent, therefore, longevity. Though I should just add one thing. Our news gets faster and faster. Our bulletins, our reports get shorter and shorter. But there is, of course, a new platform for the in-depth, very well studied, very well researched and investigated pieces as well, which we've seen and which we have to cherish. Because if that work stops, then we are all gradually going towards that sort of common bottom line of the lowest common denominator.
Excellent. As we approach the end of our time together, I just wanted to ask you, kind of as a summary question, what are the biggest challenges to international media today, as kind of a way to summarize? What are the biggest challenges that journalists will be confronting?
I think, well, there are 2 or 3 of them, if not more. Let's get to the nuts and bolts. Economics, huge issue. How do you fund these channels? Coming from the BBC, COVID has been extremely expensive. A lot of the revenues coming into an international TV channel have been coming through banks, airlines, hotels, all the things that basically had to row back in time of COVID. I mean, especially, who's going to advertise an airline during COVID? I mean, it's just, it's gone. So that's a reality. Simple financial reality. It is a very, very tough gig. International media is a very challenging space. There is another way to do it, and that is government funding, which will bring into play some of the accusations that you may get from Russia, for example. And let's be honest, if you start working down the list of international channels, most of them have some sort of significant government funding, and that brings with it political leanings. So, and they become a challenge for every news organization. And many of my colleagues have moved off to other channels and have found that it is extremely difficult to work in an area where you are told you do need to do this story and you need to do it a certain way, because that's just not the DNA that they have within them, where they've come from. So I think those are real challenges. And the other one, really, it is the Google effect. There are so many ways to go out and get news and decide whether you want it or not, and whether you believe it or not, that's up to you. If you like the sensationalism of some different channels, you'll go for it and you'll take it. International media is, in my book, for most of us, it's the second source. You've still got a domestic source to work on. And that in itself creates its own problem. We seem to be in a world which is ever less global and ever more local at the moment. I don't think that helps. We have this unbelievable polarization of politics across much of certainly the Western world. Polarization would be a blessing in some parts of the world, but in ours, it's a curse in my book. Those are the sorts of challenges. But we're heading down the digital route. The TV is disappearing. I'm sitting here on my smartphone talking to you guys in relatively high quality. I hope the discussion is at least. The TV is gradually fading away, and there are different ways of doing it. So if we can adapt to that, if we can hold on to audiences and make them believe in our objectivity, then there is still a very good argument for having us, and hopefully enough of an argument to suggest that at some point things will start swinging around again, and people will recognise that what you are looking for, objectivity, fairness, impartial coverage, even when it's not necessarily right, is the right way to go.
David, it's been a great pleasure.
Thank you very much
Yes.
for joining us. It's been fantastic for us, and we would love to have you as a guest again in the future if you're willing.
I'd be delighted. Real pleasure to join you. I hope we've at least partly answered the questions.
Thank you so much.
And maybe one day we could welcome you to campus.
That's right. It would be wonderful to have you to campus.
Yeah.
That would be an absolute pleasure. Gents, thank you very much.